last year, we had to postpone our event due to the pandemic, and we were very excited to get going here again. Thank you so much to our sponsors who have stayed with us, and their logos you can see here all around me. We're looking forward to seeing you and your booths in person again in the fall. Today's podium discussion is intended as a kickoff event leading to our in-person industry forum with Marlon Blackwell and his keynote presentation on Transcendental Regionalism. Portland CSI has been weaving together all participants shaping our urban environment, and our group here today is a great testament to that. A huge thank you to Carol, Hen-Mei, Tim, Ben, and Dawn, who will initiate a redefinition of regionalism for us here in the Pacific Northwest. The charge is to find a way on how we can move regionalism from the physicality that we're familiar with to a deeper challenge of how our cities are shaped in this age of cultural shift, equity, resilience, physical separation, lack of social infrastructure, and technological innovation. Before I hand it over to Dawn, one quick announcement. This podium discussion is actually available for one HSW credit by the AIA. So please make sure to add your name into the chat if you want that credit. And now, Dawn, please take it away.
Okay. Thank you. And welcome everyone out there that we don't know who you are or where you are. This discussion came out of some wonderings of an old architect, I would say, in that much of my work, as some of you know, is consulting in different places in the nation and the world, dealing with planning, urban design, different kinds of expressions that we might see in different locales that are special to those particular locales. For the last number of projects that I've been involved in for the last 5 years, I would say, the issue of equity, of cultural recognition has been paramount in both the discussions of what something should be, but also how it should operate within a culture and a society. I was quite taken with John Cava's book of Barns and Palaces, which is the work of John Yon, and realize that all of us have have developed this legacy or understand this legacy of Northwest regionalism. And from Belusky, Walter Gordon, John Yon, others, Norm Zimmer, Saul Zake, the list goes on, and realize that the Northwest regionalism as we define it is more object-based. And we kind of all know it when we see it. It has to do with materiality, has to do with simplicity of plan, has to do with the detail about how things are made, and most of all, how something sits in the land. And I got to thinking about how, by redefining regionalism, how we could begin to extend a thought pattern of regionalism to a greater audience, a greater impact area. That could regionalism begin to define a culture? Could regionalism begin to define an experience? Could regionalism begin to define something far greater than the object? With all due respect to our Northwest regionalism and the beautiful architecture and design that comes out of that, could we, in our kind of reinventing life that we're going to be involved in our reinventing the city, again, define regionalism in such a way that it would be a lot more all-encompassing. So I proposed to CSI this idea of bringing together 4 professionals, each of which come at what I would define, what I would say regionalism in a different way. And what we've asked each of them to do is to speak about, from their perspective, what they think about regionalism and how regionalism is both impactful of their work, but also maybe a new definition of regionalism could come out of their work. So it's that kind of idea that we hope to have the discussion about. This will be rather free form, freewheeling, but I think as we have as we go through this, hopefully this will begin to set up a dialogue that will go beyond this particular event and will be continued on in the CSI forum in the fall. But hopefully will become maybe a subject of a larger conference or a larger discussion in the spring of 2022. So that's kind of the agenda for tonight. And I will introduce each one. They will give a short presentation. And once we are through that, then there will be kind of a question and answer period between the participants where they might ask another participant questions or delve more deeply into their presentation. So the first person is Ben Wechter of Wechter Architecture. And Ben, we'll turn the floor over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Don. So what I would like to do, or what I will be doing as a contribution to this conversation on regionalism is share a current project, a project that's under construction right now. It's a special project to me. It's special in a few ways. One is that it's made entirely of solid wood. It's made of mass timber, and it's been a dream of mine to work on a project like this for a long time. A building that has strong clarity, not only in composition and spatial order, but also in constructional clarity and material clarity. So I'll be sharing that, but I think before that, it's helpful to share our approach as a studio. And so what I'll do is I'll try to share my screen here. Can people see my screen? Yes, okay, great. So, so I'll be sharing that project. It's so special because it's solid wood, which is really interesting for us, and how from an experiential point of view, how special that can be, but also how a solid mass timber project can uniquely connect with our roots and our history in the Northwest with timber and heavy timber in particular, and the craft behind that. But before doing that, I'd like to share our approach as a studio and how it relates to regionalism. And to begin with, our process is really experientially driven. We view our buildings as spatial vessels that one occupies within and around, vessels that are rooted in their place, and with their addition to place, improve it, or improves one's experience of that place. And our ultimate goal is really to create places that feel good to be in. And as we've reflected on our own work, trying to better understand what's working and what's not working, one quality has consistently emerged in the projects that come closest to that goal. And that quality is clarity, specifically experiential clarity. And so in that way, clarity has really become an overarching goal in our work. These images, so these models that you see are a series of 10 projects that we've completed. And the idea of the models was actually to uproot them from their context as a way to understand their spatial and compositional clarity on their own. And this, of course, might seem funny to show, or a funny idea to present in a conversation around regionalism, but it's an important aspect of our work. The idea that for ultimate experiential clarity, we found that our buildings must simultaneously be able to be uprooted and understand whole and complete on their own, but also placed into their context and add in a positive way and connect in a positive way to the region. So the next images I find helpful to share, and these are really images that relate to the universal, these universal ideas of clarity. And then I'll move to some images that relate more directly to connecting to regionalism. But this one, I like this image. It's of the Ibn Tulun Mosque in Cairo. And I like this because it demonstrates that this idea of clarity, experiential clarity, this one being the mediation between complexity and simplicity and chaos and order. It really shows that this idea of clarity is transcultural, it's also transhistorical. So it's an idea that can take place in old cities, in new cities, the clarity, the compositional clarity of the grid of New York. It can happen in hill towns, so this one in Italy, in Civita, where the buildings of the hill town group formally and experientially with the topography. And it can happen in Swiss villages, this one, Vrins, Switzerland, where the buildings of the village group together, creating a clarity of entry and exit. So the threshold between entering the village and exiting is very strong. And then, of course, clarity can occur in nature. And so an image of a meadow in the Three Sisters wilderness. And then, so on one hand, with our buildings, we balance this universal idea of clarity, of spatial clarity, of compositional clarity, of material. And then on the other hand, we try to strongly root our buildings in its place. And we do this through forms that are appropriate for a particular region. We do that through local materials, through an understanding of local skills. So what's the building culture and what are people good at and what's really the craft of that place. Of course, climate consideration, what buildings are good for that particular climate, and economic considerations. But ultimately, themes or things that make a building fit into its context. So when one visits it, one's memory of that building is tied to its place. And so for this building, this mass timber building, this building made entirely of wood, the idea of connecting to our roots of timber and specifically heavy timber and mass timber, and connecting to the atmosphere and what it really feels like to be in and around these types of buildings. The heft, the material richness, and the sort of feeling of longevity that exists with these. So the project is, it's on Mississippi Avenue. It's, of course, this image doesn't show any wood. It has a rain jacket. The building is a 3-story building, and it's entirely wood, and it has a rain jacket. So a rain jacket of metal vertical box ribs on the outside, but from the inside, it's entirely wood. It's on North Mississippi in Skidmore. It's a courtyard building. So the courtyard, you enter the courtyard from Mississippi through a portal, and all of the entries into the building are from this courtyard. So it's really meant to be the living room and entry arrival place for the building. The courtyard is also a snippet of the context, and this diagram describes that. And this diagram also shows that idea of the building being lifted up out of its context. So it's whole and complete on its own and has its own internal logic, but placed within its context, it connects and improves and heightens one's perception of place. As I mentioned, it's entirely mass timber, so it's made out of wall panels and floor panels that are 6 inches thick. It's made out of beams that span from wall to wall that come from the same factory and made out of the same species of wood. The stair is also made out of the same mass timber pieces, and all the components of the stair were prefabricated in the factory. This is an image on the lower left, is all of the pieces together. And above and to the right, you can see the kit of parts. So all of the pieces were manufactured in the factory, sent on trucks and delivered to the site. Here you can see some of the floor panel, or one of the floor panels on the left, and then the beams on the right. The beams on the right, you can see where the Rikon connection, or it's been tooled for the Rikon connection at the end of the beams, so that it's a concealed and fireproof connection. Here's an image of the beginning of the construction. So the tower crane is placed in the courtyard, and you can see the west side of the building being constructed here. The panels, the vertical panels, the panels between the windows go from foundation to parapet, so they're about 40 feet tall. And in this case, this elevation, they're about 3.5 feet wide. The blank walls go 40 feet tall and are about 6 feet wide. The party wall against the adjacent building there to the right, because it's a party wall and because it was impossible to access and waterproof and clad that wall after it was erected, the insulation, the waterproofing and insulation and cladding was done on the ground. So that panel was actually tilted up as one singular piece that was 30 feet wide and 40 feet tall. So an enormous panel to lift up, but that was first, and then these other pieces were placed second, the vertical ones that go 40 feet, and then stitched together with spandrel panels where you see the windows. So the building is unique in that it's built a bit like a tilt-up concrete structure, where the walls go up first, and then beams, and then floors. And was interesting. I don't have a picture of it here, but it was interesting, that west side and then also the east side where we're standing now. You could stand in essentially this 3-story room with 4 walls before the beams and floors went in. Here's an image where it's a bit further along. So we're looking, we're standing or flying from the east, looking west. So the courtyard in the middle, and you can see how those panels on this east side go top to bottom without the floor. Looking into the courtyard. And one thing to note is that this possible would really have been impossible. A lot of CLT or mass timber projects around here have been constructed with mobile cranes, but because every piece of this project is built of mass timber, it was really, even the smallest piece, even the spandrel panels between windows, it was impossible to lift up without a crane. And so the tower crane, this is a relatively small tower crane, but the tower crane was really instrumental. It would have been impossible without it to erect the building. And then I'm going to finish up here with some images inside the building. And this is really our goal. Our goal was to end up with a building that has an atmosphere and strong character and longevity to that of earlier Northwest heavy timber buildings of this area. This is looking the other way. So this image, the windows are to the left, and to the right is the courtyard without the spandrel panels in it, and without the connector. And that ends my presentation of Mississippi.
Thank you, Ben. What you did not mention that you are both developer and that your office will be in the building when it's finished.
I didn't mention that, and I didn't mention that we're also building it ourselves. And it's I think every 10 or 15 years, I build a building for myself. And right after I do that, I realize what a terrifying prospect that is. And so this one has been the most terrifying. And I think it'll be probably another 20 years before I attempt something else.
Well, hopefully it'll be less than 20 years before you occupy it.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you speak as you did of the overall project, that there were some tenets that came across that were very much in the tradition of Northwest regionalism, of material, of craft, and your overarching idea of clarity. And I think that congratulations, and we look forward to hearing more from you as we go on through this. Second person I would like to introduce is Carol Kakis, who's a partner principal at Place, landscape architecture, urban design planning. And when I asked Carol to join our crew here, it was because of the work that I see Place doing, which is actually designing and building places within a city, which then I think become the kind of the infrastructure of what a city could be. And to me, the landscape, the planning, the urban design, again, are unique things that we experience in Northwest regionalism that we should take notice of. So Carol, turn that over to you, please.
Thanks, Don. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Well, we too appreciate the opportunity to share both the ideas that inspire and shape our creative process. responding to and contributing to the regional character. And that starts also with the simple idea of our name, of our studio place. It's a space where the community comes together, but it's also reflective of the central tenet that it's a spirit of place, that we're trying to narrate the stories of those places and people. Water is another defining characteristic of Pacific Northwest, and it's also special to our studio because on March 22nd, World Water Day, it's when we started our company, and it was really important to us to launch at that time. And it was also the day when we received our first commission, which I will share with you a little bit later. The evolution of those ideas across time and space, for us, it's like standing before these forest giants, admiring their roots as they're soaring to the sky, and they're kind of connecting to the ancient spirit. But they remind my colleagues and myself about our multicultural roots and our journey to the Pacific Northwest and interconnectedness of all of us together. Our new home is curated by landscapes of promise. This idea of the myth of an unspoiled Eden, vast outdoor playgrounds. And what initially drew us to creating a studio in the Pacific Northwest actually remains true today. It's about people, it's about ideas, it's about environmental consciousness in city planning, focus on walkability and public transport. It's this notion of locally grown food, that it's close, accessible, farm to table, vibrant art scene, and craft making culture. These qualities, along with those social, economic, and racial inequalities of all times, and especially now, the times that we're living in, deserve both our attention and focus, and we feel that they continue to inspire our process, especially as a minority-owned design practice. So as the world continues to get more modernized and is becoming global and hyper-connected, our studio seeks to create the meaningful site-specific connections that are rooted in nature. So we continually ask ourselves questions: how do we create the local distinctiveness with the global impact? How do we create inclusive environments at any space, at any scale, at any budget? And so our ideas have been fluid over the last decade. We are a relatively young practice. And instead of showcasing examples, we'll just showcase some explorations of the concepts. We have been passionate both about landscape and modernism, and privileged that we have been recently engaged with the restoration of the historic landmark in Portland, which is Halpern open space sequence. And 50 years ago, last year, so 2020, and the celebration was relatively private because of COVID. Lawrence Halpern, 5 decades ago, he laid down the marker for the Portland public realm, and employing this narrative of sequencing of the space, the quartet of the public plazas, with the natural world as a source of the inspiration. And Halpern Design's ideas of the open space reach beyond just mimicking of nature. They brought into the heart of downtown the environment of the greater region, the Columbia River, the Cascade Mountains, the vision of the civic space that would be for everyone. And Halpern saw these plazas as theater sets for choreographing human life. And the soul of those original vision with Halpern was actually curated in collaboration with his wife, a renowned dance choreographer, Anna Halpern. Published throughout the world, Portland Open Space Sequence instantaneously became a pilgrimage site and a destination landscape, timeless. And it's this idea of the destination landscape actually that makes us reflect back on the Pacific Northwest that has been extensive resource-based economy, where we sold the landscapes for the primary commodity, which was timber. And today we are in a similar fashion selling landscapes, but we are selling them not as a commodity, but as the experiential, for the experiential characteristic of those landscapes. So this idea of the destination landscape, it's really fascinating to us. At the same time, we are trying to, in our work, to translate these notions of the sublime landscape characteristics of the region into public realm. And how can it lead to potentially very powerful vernacular. This is a Eated Green. It is our studio first commission. We got it on the first day when we opened the door, so it was both pretty exciting and pretty unnerving. And the dominant natural attributes of this project are experiential qualities of the Pacific Northwest that are abstractions of the region's sense of place. This project is a story about transparency of government operations within the building that require this really strict safety measures, still trying to create a sense of welcome and respite and sublime. The landscape is showcased here through multi-story vertical green facade, and it's brought into the building through visual transparency. While glass creates a protection from elements, it also allows light to penetrate year-round these local colors, which in Pacific Northwest tend to be cool colors of green, blues, and grays. Another element or consideration in the work that was featured here is actually revealing and incorporating artwork as a part of the design concept. This was the artwork that at the time when the project was created was behind the building, and it wasn't available for the public. And we thought that it should be one that deserves a care and respect and desire to serve the public and to celebrate the culture. So we brought it to the forefront of the project. Or for example, we are fascinating with ideas of contemplated passage of time, at place where kind of quotidian worries can succumb to beauty, or they can potentially frame memorable moments. The idea of the art of the designing intimate landscapes enclosure, selectively revealing the extent of the larger wilderness, regardless of the scale of the project, creating either escape or connections by blurring the lines between indoors and outdoors. At the same time, like Ben was talking about, idea of the craftsmanship, the very intentional application of the regional materials, either salvaged timbered or materials chosen for their longevity. The idea of the rust on the steel that create a sense of patina, nurse logs or mossy boulders. Those are all very small, intimate scales that can continue to amplify the regional characteristics. All of this, from our perspective as landscape designers, is created with the notion of the outdoor comfort, especially like embracing water as a powerful Pacific Northwest symbol, one that necessitates design responses that celebrate its life-sustaining quality. In this particular case, it looks as if it has always been there, that water hasn't been there, everything gets curated, everything gets created. But in the same time, thinking about water at different scales, scale of green infrastructure as of water, the project where we're advancing progressive environmental agenda in an urban neighborhood that essentially was characterized by redefining the superblocks as an ultimate revenge of the pedestrian. This was the blocks and blocks of the parking lots, while at the same time being very conscious about scale, the human-friendly scale. So Hustle and it's a happening LEED Platinum community at the place where no one thought people would want to go. But today it's hopping with weekend markets, movie screenings, seasonal festivities, a year round in the Central Plaza. Water as an essential element in our work and story also is an opportunity to think about climate at the greater scale, designing for senses. So this is the project at the end of the orange line where we embraced rain as a dominant design element and created a sound wall, promoting stormwater management and environmental education, while showcasing rustic qualities of the beloved Corten steel, the Northwest regional material that we all love, all while bringing really high capacity transit to underserved community. And this is an important project where our client TriMet said that basically for the first time in the history, they remember that people are not calling in to complain, but they're actually calling in to congratulate them on the work and how proud they are to have that in their neighborhood. From one transit story to the next, this one, it's fast forward to future 2025. You just landed in PDX. People gather in a nature-infused common area under the regionally sourced wooden roof as a homage of our region's spirit of craftsmanship and node to place that we all call home. And as more people come and stay and they're looking for a new home, our studio strives to connect and generates a really rich conversation and instill hope. The Gateway Discovery Park is an example of the project where we seek to generate a positive long-term community transformation. This is the neighborhood where 36% of the household identifies ethnic minorities, 70 different languages are spoken here, 28% of households are experiencing poverty. This is the place that requires all the tools of our trade to help to give the voice. So in the spirit of adventure, we use the local artists to help us create a process as a communication tool, using art as a communication, creating series of public open house gatherings, like tactical urban interventions, creating the idea of the third space years before there was a project on a site to transform the brownfield to thriving park by bringing young and younger heart into contact with nature, where nature wasn't there. And so the idea of these iconic landmarks, and then sculpting it to mimic the elements of the greater topography, the highly anticipating living room of East Portland, symbolically reminds us also of our combined journeys of the people at our studio, right? We understand that we stand on the shoulders of so many community members, activists, civic leaders, planners, creatives. And after nearly 60 years in making, the Gateway community in this specific example is now enjoying safe, culturally vibrant, family-friendly park. For place, the essence essentially of this creative process and what we do is in the storytelling. It is in the storytelling of the people and the place. It is the idea of accentuating the native scenery and creating ambient outdoor comforts with an aim of a welcoming open space for everyone. That's all I have for you.
Thank you, Carol. As you know, and I think in telling others, I just admire the work you all are doing so much. It really transcends boundaries. And to me, that again is one of the qualities maybe of our regionalism, is that it isn't just the building, and it isn't just the land, and it isn't just the art, but it is the amalgamation of all the pieces that go together, what you refer to as connectivity, the cultural roots of what we have within this kind of wonderful environment we have, and how you've utilized this adopted environment into the work in many different ways. I'd like now to turn to Han Mei Chang with Hoffman Construction, and Han Mei, many will recognize as a former chapter president for American Institute of Architects Portland chapter, but also an architect that has found a place within an organization that I feel is, again, one of those unique things that has unique organizations that has occurred within this region that potentially could not have occurred in other places. So Han Mei, please.
Great. Hi, everyone. So within the current climate and the global pandemic, it's really got me thinking about what truly defines our region. In many ways, Portland is an island within Oregon. We not only serve the metro area, but we also service communities up and down the I-5 corridor and crossing the Columbia River into Vancouver and beyond. We actually are lucky that, we have so many resources within 100 miles. And this current situation has truly highlighted to me the opportunities and need to source local, as we can no longer rely on factories to ship materials quickly from overseas and as needed. So within Hoffman, we've always tried to buy local first and support the communities in which we build. We were founded in Portland almost 100 years ago now. And although the opportunities for us have arisen to move outside of the city center or change cities, we're committed to Portland and staying downtown. What attracted me to Hoffman is that we don't only build the hard and complicated projects, but that the culture is flat and that we put our employees and our projects as the core company values. We don't have titles on our business cards. There's no ladder to climb. The leash is very long and they'll let me run as far as I can. And I think that's what really keeps me here, quite frankly, is that they recognize that no two people are the same and that we all have different goals and capacities, and that's okay. We're 100% employee owned, and most of our employees stay with Hoffman for over 20 years. The Hoffman culture is deeply rooted in people and giving back to our community, and they encourage us to do so. What I wanted to talk about today is primarily our annual charitable giving campaign, where Hoffman will match up to $1,000 in charitable giving annually per employee. So it's a great way to make my own donations go a lot farther and give back more to the community. Essentially, I'm encouraged to donate close to $100 a month, and Hoffman will match that at the end of the year. So the reason why I share this with you is that more than 80% of our employees participate in this program. With a company of about 500 employees, that means that we're putting back at least $400,000 in the Pacific Northwest each year, and then Hoffman is matching that. As shareholders in the company, we're further challenged to donate 10% of our annual salaries to the community. So imagine what this could be like if every local business did this and had an annual giving campaign like Hoffman's. The financial impacts we could make on the city and revive it to empower our employees would be a great Kickstarter, and it's just endless. The possibilities would be endless. In addition to the monetary contributions, we're also encouraged to give our time. For me personally, I've chosen to invest in the future of our industry and working directly with students in the BIPOC community. On a quarterly basis, we tour POIC pre-apprenticeship students through a current job site. We've also sponsored hip hop architecture camps, architects in schools, and are really trying to dig deep and attend high school career fairs to show not only architecture as a possibility for future, but also construction. And then internally to Hoffman, as we've grown and started to perform more work outside of the Pacific Northwest, we found it critical to orientate our new employees with what we call the mothership, or Portland, and the long history we have as builders within the region. So with the support of our executive leadership, I developed a new hire day where once a year we gather our newly and hired employees and bring them to Portland to spend a day together. And no formal training is conducted at this gathering, but instead we get to meet each other, walk the downtown corridor, talk about the history of Hoffman, and visit the built projects. We have lunch with our CEO, David, and the new hires get the opportunity to see our main office, meet the accounting teams, the IT teams, and really provide that deep connection that we have with our community and share that with the new hires. We take great pride in the projects that we build and the subcontractors and architects and owners that we have the privilege to work with. I took this picture recently as we were wrapping up the 5 MLK project. This is the view looking downtown or west from essentially MLK and Burnside, and it's on the 17th floor roof deck. And I started to kind of put hearts in the different buildings or communities that we've built over the years. And it's really neat, and we take a lot of pride that these are projects that we've all touched in one way or another. In 2019, we launched our GUTS campaign. GUTS stands for Get Us There Safe. Safety, including mental health, is our #1 priority. This is where we take pride in our work and our people. It's truly my responsibility, as well as my coworkers, to get every craft worker home safe each night. We've successfully kept construction moving forward and craft workers safe during the pandemic. But we're also at this pivotal moment here and being very intentional with our work and our clients and our projects that hire us to do the design and the build. We need to keep this intention at the forefront of every decision. So I want to leave you with a series of questions that I asked myself to hold myself accountable as we continue forward and emerge into life after the pandemic. I lost some of my notes here, but let's see if I can do it. So some of the questions include: what new businesses will be emerging and how do we provide them an opportunity to support? What have I done lately and in the last week to support the BIPOC community? You know, and let's see. Nope. And so it's really up to us, you know, being stewards of our communities at Portland and the region, to take those next steps and really move forward with intention.
Thank you, Hanmei.
Thanks.
For the 40-some years that I've been practicing in Portland, Hoffman has always been a leader here, I would say, in a lot of ways, and not only as a construction company, but both in the way that the people from Hoffman have worked within the community, mm-hmm. have helped build community, mm-hmm. And it is something that I greatly admire. And what I would like to say, however, out of your slides, I love the coffee mug that says "well-behaved women seldom make history," and I know that you make good trouble, so I like that.
Thanks.
The fourth person on our panel that I would like to introduce is Tim Eddy, Henneberry Eddy, and at the last design conference, Tim's office gave a presentation, and I was very impressed. In fact, kind of blown away with the culture of the office. Not only were they putting out good design product, but there was a ownership, there was an understanding of the places that they were creating, and there seemed to be a genuine commitment towards the idea of regionalism that went beyond the object. And so I asked him to be a part of this panel. And so Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Don. So I'm going to address regionalism as a core value of our practice. And let me see if I can share my screen here. Oops. I can effectively, there we go. There we go. And I'm effectively at the tail end of a whole presentation. I don't know how we ended up on the last slide. It's no fair. So what I'd like to do is start with our core values. And I appreciated seeing Hanmei share Hoffman's as well. And I've highlighted the one of our core values that directly pertains to the physical product of our work, and everything else about our approach, that's listening and asking why and editing to the essentials and fostering delight, taking personal ownership, thinking long-term, and making others successful, is all in support of making places that are tied to their region and site, and making what we call regionally relevant architecture. And we work across multiple geographic regions, and each project must be rooted in its own culture and context. And I have to say, our approach was crafted here in the Northwest. And it's in a culture that values collegial discourse between architects and contractors and the development community and urbanists, and it also values the greater good of design thinking. And so, to be clear, what I'm talking about here is really an approach. It's not a style or you can't pick our buildings out, I don't think. So as architects, we strive for our buildings to go beyond the ordinary, beyond what you can see, hear, and taste, and touch, or feel, to a place where they inspire others and contribute to the context of their place. And in our work, we to achieve this, we seek inspiration from the people, and the people who inhabit our projects, our clients and their culture, from the environmental, site, and ecological circumstances, and from the landscape, the geography, the geology, the historical, physical, built context. And in doing so, we embrace what we call a net positive approach, where the whole must be greater than the sum of the parts in terms of reflecting culture and responding to context and history and the environmental sustainability and resilience. And so every one of our projects balances on these three legs, every one of our notable and successful projects. And so in this particular project, the culture really received an extra emphasis. And this was for our work with Cascades Academy of Central Oregon. In this project, its three wings relate closely to the culture of the school's experiential learning program, with lower, middle, and upper school students gathering independently from one another in spaces that are tailored to their age groups, with all the spaces closely connected to the site. In this project, Fire Station 76 in Multnomah County, East County, it's crafted around the lives and the culture of the firefighters and the emergency services personnel who live and work in the building. The building houses very personal space and is very intentionally recalls its rural Oregon setting through its form and its materials and its siting. So the places and structures that came before us, and they provide context, they provide bearing, and they're inherently regionally relevant. So buildings like Strand Ag Hall at Oregon State University were foundational to Oregon as it grew and educated its leaders. And this building was built over 100 years ago. For us, it was a great opportunity to be asked to repurpose Pietro Beluschi's Federal Reserve Bank building in Portland. We brought, subtle interventions to the building that, deferred to the simple grace of the building and gave it a new life. At the Rothko Pavilion and campus renovation at the Portland Art Museum, we're increasing the viability of the museum's historic Beluschi and Mark buildings, and providing them new life through connectivity and access. The design defers to its historic context and addresses the broader context of downtown and the park blocks through its urban design connections. But each of these places was already regionally relevant, and our firm's role and our historic resources group's role is committed to reinforcing this leg of the stool wherever we're working. In our approach to designing for regional relevancy, the third leg of the stool is wrapped around environment and sustainability. The PCC Newberg Center is more than a technical or technological response. While it was one of the first higher ed LEED Platinum buildings in the country that was designed to net zero energy, the design was mission driven in connecting to students, the site, and the community of Newberg. The College of Business at Montana State University in Bozeman established a new cultural norm in terms of interdisciplinary collaboration and it was shaped around energy conservation, daylighting, and a response to its historic brick campus context. And inspiration from the geology and the landscape and the geography of the region. We're designing residential environmental learning center campuses in Wyoming, Washington, and Tennessee that are aspiring, all different clients, all different programs, but they're all aspiring to meet the International Living Future Institute's Living Building Challenge. This recent effort for the Great Smoky Mountains Institute in Tennessee is rooted in a light touch on the land and conceived around orientation and natural ventilation and shaded and sheltered spaces. These projects span very different regions and cultures, and the architecture differs significantly from one to the next. But our approach to learning from our clients and understanding the context and seeking inspiration from what we find there and responding to the environmental circumstances was common to all. Thanks. And that's my last image.
Thank you, Tim. The whole is greater than the parts. Wonderful. Well, I'd like to open this section of the panel to the panelists. And do you have questions, comments to other panelists? Who would like to go first? Carol?
Thanks, Don. Thanks all the presenters. It's great to hear the different perspectives, and perhaps my questions to Ben and Tim. And it leads from what perhaps Mike, my colleague, was asking right before the presentation, that is that are we going to share any ideas about other parts of the regions? And so the question to this idea of the culture of design is that what makes the design in the Northwest specifically unique now from the other regions, and what are kind of the core values that they're going to timeless and they're going to carry forward.
Hey, Ben, you want to take that?
I can start. I'm looking. I'm jealous of all of Tim's projects and working across the country, so I'm interested to hear Tim's response in working in different places. I think most of our work is regionally. We recently we have a project in Detroit, 2 projects actually in Detroit, and it's been interesting to think about that question of what makes a building uniquely rooted in Detroit versus a building rooted in Portland or the Northwest. We recently finished a hotel in the Gorge. And so it's interesting to think about, what is it like to work what's different about the Gorge? It's all in the Northwest, but what's different about working in the Gorge than say in Portland? Or in the Willamette Valley, we did a winery in Dundee. So what's the difference of working in Dundee versus Portland versus the Gorge? And I think, for us, it's really, as I was describing before, there's some really common threads to all the projects, and there's some big differences. And the common threads being that each of these buildings, and I guess I'm thinking of Furioso Vineyards in Dundee, and the Society Hotel in Bingen, Washington, in the Gorge, and then our newer projects in Detroit. All of them are similar in that the buildings we spend a lot of time making sure that they're whole and complete on their own. So in your mind's eye, you could actually lift them up out of their context, and they make sense as these vessels that you can occupy within and around spatially. they're concise, compositionally, they're concise. And then, but what really, I mean, for us, what's been interesting and fun working in these different environments is just how they can uniquely root themselves. And so I guess I don't have the image here to share, unfortunately, but our Society Hotel in the Gorge, the big challenge there and really our concept for the project, for the new part of the project was adaptive reuse of an existing, what used to be a school building, but there was a new construction part, which was essentially 20 detached cabins. And so we were presented with this challenge and opportunity, the challenge being, and opportunity being the scale and beauty of the gorge. And so how to add these relatively small cabins to a context with that scale in a way that they would work together and complement each other. And then also the idea that the hotel is within a neighborhood within Bingen, and how to buffer itself both for the neighborhood and for itself between within the neighborhood, but at the same time connect to the bigness of the gorge. And so our solution for that was to create a singular roof that connected all of the cabins together and essentially became this aperture to frame the bigness of the gorge. So in that case, the form of the project, even though it could be uprooted and it was whole and complete on its own, the form was completely tied to its context in a way that it reinforced it and it made it better than it was. And not to go into the other projects, but in each of the cases, the form and what materials were used were specific to that place.
Tim, you want to respond
Well,
to the question?
yeah, this idea of timeless, core values in the Northwest that we kind of carry around with us wherever we go is an interesting one. Before I dive into that, I want to say that there is a level of elemental perceptiveness and simplicity in Ben's work that I'm tremendously envious of it, and the projects lend themselves well to it, and I find it very interesting, and I think it does express some of these values, and one is letting the site and the landscape speak through the project, and so not to overwhelm it. Maybe this is don't move too much dirt, don't take out too many trees, take advantage of the views in the right way, but preserve the character of the place, because the building coming afterwards, and that's that can be in an urban environment just the same, in that case it's the things that the reason I came to Portland 30 years ago was because I thought it had the potential to be the best city in the United States. And the effort and the sensitivity that has been put into understanding how an urban place and a downtown and public open space should work, it has been taken further here than I think anywhere in the country. And I think that's something that we carry with us when we work in other cities and other places. And there's this certain simplicity of plan and efficiency of thinking that I think we learn here from Northwest, the Northwest modernism. And it's all those things that you talked about initially, Don, and it has this feeling as though it's born out of necessity rather than, created for its own sake. It's, don't make any unnecessary moves. And there's a project I just thought of as Ben was talking there that I could have put in this slideshow, this slide deck. A few years ago, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I did a really interesting house in Vermont. And it was, oops. What happened there?
You're okay.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, this house in Vermont, and talking with the contractor as we're going through the design work and the project, and in the early phases, and for us it was a pretty traditional house, but trying to channel as much Vermont as we could, and I can't imitate his Vermont accent, but at one point when he looked at the amount of glass in the house and he just said, well, a Vermonter would just never do it that way. I said, well, I guess that's a little bit of the Pacific Northwest coming through.
Yeah. Ben or Tim, do you have a question for either Carol or Anne-May?
Well, I have sort of a similar question for Carol, and I really liked, I forget exactly how you described it, but experiential qualities of the Northwest and the idea of abstracting that and deploying it within your projects. I'd be curious to hear you describe that in a little more detail, how you go about that.
Yeah, so as a newcomers to Northwest, I think that we start with an idea of not taking anything for granted, and with a very keen observation. I have the benefit of our team where more than half of us speak multiple languages, and any given day in a studio, there's 3 or 4 languages going on. And so the idea that we are world travelers and we do work globally as we are working in the Northwest. And so there's this melting pot of the ideas. And then extrapolating that in a kind of context that we're in right now, just being almost like the kids in a toy store, right? That any walk through the forest or down by the river or being in a natural setting, it's what we crave for. It's the idea of why we moved here. It's the reason why Portland is our home. And it's those old elements that I spoke at the very beginning, this idea of the vicinity of the world to the world's largest ocean. It's the volcanic peaks. It's the idea of snow-fed raging rivers, wide open skies, just this immense playground. And so that becomes a palette of ingredients to start to think about it, that kind of everything is possible. And then it can also be overwhelming. So then how do you extrapolate down to what it's visible in your work, which is this exquisite, elegant simplicity, right? And that's what we strive for. And then this question of how do you do it at any scale? And how do you do it in any budget? How do you do it with any given time? And so our work ranges from the backyard to planning the entire west side of Portland and implementing it in a matter of 14 months, right? And at any given day, we work on that continuum of scales. So when it comes to the projects in the Northwest here, the idea, it's always like, okay, where are we and how do we orient ourselves? What is the idea of the sense of discovery, right? Anything from framing the object or the architecture within the landscape setting. It is the process through which we communicate in the studio, which is very flat. And the ideas can come from anywhere, from anyone. Everything happens in transparent, real time way. So we live in a one open box together, and everything is up on a wall. Every piece of real estate in the studio, it's up for grabs. So for example, when we were working up at Oregon Zoo and we were working on elephant exhibit, somebody said, well, how big is the elephant? And he's like, yeah, how big is the elephant? And so we said like, well, let's just draw it. So somebody just took the silhouette and we projected on the wall, and next thing you know, we had the real life-size elephant. And if you're going to have an elephant in a room, you might as well make it pink, right? So then we went down the street and just grabbed the pink paint, and this was all spontaneous, right? And out of the blue, just like next thing you know, everybody was like putting their hands into the pink paint and putting it on a wall. And then we brought the ladders and we went up to 14 feet, and it didn't stop there. And people are starting putting the footprints kind of on each other's shirts, right? And regardless of like, you know, do you have a really nice dress shirt on or not? And so it's that sense of playfulness too, that I think it comes through the work, that nothing is precious, being kind of free and open. And then how do you balance that with the budget and the schedule and respect for the client? But we generally see ourselves as we are the tool through which we can communicate client story, the stories of the people that we're involved with. And because of the multicultural fluency, there tend to be no translator, no middle person. So if we are working with kids in the public schools or for parks, we don't need that person to connect with a kid. We are able to be there on the ground, play together, and just hear their stories and their imagination. And so public process, it's integral in everything that we do. And it's a connections with the people. And oftentimes, I shouldn't say often, there have been occasions where we actually talk people and groups and clients and non-for-profits out of doing the project. And we spend years just in the process and having the conversation, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about creating a project for us or a commission, but it was doing the right thing. So I don't know.
I have a question for Anne-May. Anne-May, it seems to me that a little bit about what we are about as regionalists or as a part of this is a question about transferability. Let me put it that way. In that we all operate within this bubble that is influenced by us, by those that come to live here, and is admired by people that come to visit. You are in a unique catbird seat in many ways because of the stature of Hoffman and the map that you showed about the extent of the work that you all had done throughout the United States. So my question is whether the culture of Hoffman is transferable to these other locations. And the second part of that question has to do with, is the culture of Hoffman to also build internally to Portland to the Northwest to help smaller firms or startup firms, or especially people that might have people of color, where they're looking for an economic development or something like that. So anything like that you can add into this discussion.
No, I think the other thing about Hoffman is that we're extremely humble, or I hope that everyone is humble. We don't publish these donations that we do. We do everything because we want to, not because we want the applause or the recognition. As far as being transferable, our larger teams are the ones that end up traveling to these larger projects. We try to stay in the Pacific Northwest, but when an owner asks us to go somewhere else, we'll chase that work. So when we do deploy to these other states outside of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, they're typically larger teams. So those teams are become rooted in the new community. And so one of their ways to kind of get together is to host get-togethers and picnics and fundraisers, find the local food banks or toy drives at the holidays and really rally the troops, so to speak, to get people involved and get the subcontractors that are working in those communities to also get involved. So it's not unique that this is what we do in just the Pacific Northwest, but it's something that we take with us on the road. Similarly, when it comes to the local community here, we are deeply invested. We have some wonderful success stories where we've helped different subcontractors and vendors with recycling and starting new facilities and programs. So one that I can talk to is last time we were out at Hillsborough doing a big fab. We helped and got on board with City of Roses to develop a strategy for recycling all the wood that we use as formwork. And so between all the recycling and the formwork, City of Roses ended up starting a new division, and I think it's since broken off, but it's called Sankofa. And Sankofa was or is the first FSC certified recycled wood material. And so that came straight out of trying to do something with all of our formwork and wood and not throwing it in the dump, but actually turning it into something new. So sustainability, I think, is another big one regionally that is unique for the Pacific Northwest and something that I think we all take for granted, and it's part of our ethos. But when you work outside of Oregon and Washington and Idaho, it's not necessarily the case. So I think that's another piece that I think all of us collectively take with us when we work outside of this region, or what we're calling the Pacific Northwest, in our design and our projects.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I have a follow-on question while you're on a roll, Han Mei. I mean, you have multiple offices, you've got job sites over multiple states, and you can have hundreds, maybe, in some cases, thousands of workers, subcontractors, and these enormous teams working on these projects. And so carrying that culture beyond, the core Hoffman team out into these larger, broader groups. My first question is, how has that gone? And have you, you obviously can't exactly mandate your core values, but have you seen growth and been able to translate that in a positive way? And are there things that you have learned as a company that you've been able to bring back that have enhanced your culture here in the Northwest?
Yeah, all great questions. I think it comes from the top down, but the part that I think is different from our competitors is that with the employee ownership, like, we truly care about each other. We care about how other projects are doing. We want every project to be a successful project. And if we're not allowing subcontractors to be successful, like, we're not successful, and then the project is not successful. So how we lead in the field is truly by example, and setting those precedents, and having the support of the subcontractors to know that we have their back from a safety perspective. And also, when we get into the trenches and into those tough situations that typically are around financials or money, we really want it to be fair. And so it's working with the owners and the subcontractors to find what's fair. And really just knowing that we're all here. It's a very small world, it's a teamwork thing, really, in the end. And then remind me what the second part of your question was, like.
what have you been able to bring back from elsewhere that might have influenced your culture here? Your own culture?
Yeah, when we work in other parts of the country, we're always kind of looking how are other subs or general contractors, how are they doing, or how do they go vertical? So when I'm in New York for a conference or other parts of the region, I'm looking at how other people build and what safety measures do they have in place that might be on the East Coast versus the West Coast that we can bring back. And a lot of us, are natural builders, and a lot of our innovation comes from within. And we are allowed to propose ideas, whether it's from safety to improve safety, or to also improve quality or efficiency on the job site. We're empowered to bring those to the table and work on those ideas, work with the engineers, and come up with innovation. So we really rely on our people and what their ideas, and empowering them to test things out.
Thank you. Well, I think we are nearing our time, so I should probably summarize and turn it back to Alexander here. Again, the idea of tonight was the beginning of a conversation, as opposed to coming up with a number of answers. And to me, what keeps going through my mind is this difference between object and content. And that I guess what I seek in the redefinition of regionalism is more a definition of content than what the object is. It goes beyond wide roofs, wide overhangs, materials, et cetera, and how that content then can begin to continue to develop the community. And I think we're all challenged in this time, not only from recovering from COVID, but also what we can do in the future. When we look at the city and the recent letter from the fellows of the AIA about the situation in Portland, we did a wonderful job of building a physical infrastructure. We failed dramatically in developing a social and cultural infrastructure that supported that physical area. So I really feel that as designers, as people that are interested in the development of the region and regionalism, that's an area that we really have to put some time into and some effort in going forward. And that infrastructure, we have a physical infrastructure, and as Carol pointed out, we have quite an open space infrastructure throughout the city that we can build on. But we really need to somehow come up with this idea about the social and cultural infrastructure that will support that. So with that, I will turn it back to CSI and Alexander.
Wow, wow, that was amazing. Thank you. Thank you to all our guests who could join us in this awesome journey through Ben's, Carol's, Hen May's, and Tim's perspective and thoughts on regionalism. And thank you most of all to Dawn for bringing us international and now outstanding local creators over the last 11 years under the umbrella of Portland's CSI Industry Forum. I'm looking forward to the continuing conversations that we started here tonight. And with that, and it's 6:56, have a great evening. And most of us stay well and keep on talking. And let's make this place even more beautiful than it already is. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.